Many years ago, when I was just beginning training in Bible translation, and the setting is Nasik for my colleagues from India. So it's a quadrangle, and we were there, and this man comes out of a checking session saying that, "Oh my goodness, now I cannot go back to my village." I said, "What happened?" "I don't think I can go back. Uh, my people are going to think that I am a fool, or I think they are fools." So what was happening? So I was very curious. I asked him what happened inside that room where you were checking uh, with a consultant, and he said, "You know what? We were doing this verse. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck." And my consultant wants me to add something very small to this verse. Something he says is very important to understand this verse. So, what is it? So, the consultant wanted him to add, it would be better for him if a very heavy millstone were hung around his neck. So, it did not sound very outrageous to me. So, I asked, what is the issue here? It is not wrong. So, he said, "You know what? Every day in the village, we all wake up to the sound of a millstone. And we all know that this is a heavy thing. So if I add this in the translation, if I give this information, they would think that either I am a fool or I think they are fools." So this is where my thinking about providing implicit information started, even before I started translating. So this is where I'm going. So when I say implicit, I'm thinking of everything that people normally include as an additional information. It could be something about the Jewish religion or customs or instances from the Old Testament, or sometimes helping people to do the inference well by providing the inference for them. So here is it. So let's look at some of the arguments people have for providing implicit information. First one is relevance theory, and I will use the same theory for counter argument because we can use things like theory to do both. So here it is for communicative equivalence, so that they can experience the same cognitive effects that the original audience had. So, for example, Lamb of God. We know that in cultures where there are no rituals like sacrificing a lamb, they wouldn't probably understand. And also, they wouldn't understand the theological force behind this expression. And then, of course, there are cultural and theological reasons. We want to bring in clarity. Uh, for example, washing of the feet or anointing with oil. So I just heard somebody tell me yesterday that he anoints my head with oil. When the people read that, they thought it is, oh, he pours motor oil on my head because that's the only oil they have seen. So those are instances where we may need to explicate certain things. And then, of course, as Hill says, that a culture, they need to d- uh, encounter the gospel in their own language and worldview. So sometimes translation, no, every always translation acts as a missiological bridge. So sometimes we may have to add in things so that the understanding is clear. So coming to oral translations, yes, sometimes making things more explicit will help in comprehension, their cognitive accessibility, and listener engagement. Because even when we were translating for the Zhuang in India, I've so seen that when there is something they don't understand, they stop listening. They're like, okay, they've lost the train of thoughts, and they're lost because they don't understand anything, because they lost the connection there. So it helps in oral translations. Now let us look at some of the arguments against providing implicit information. So the first one is faithfulness to the original text. And the preservation of authorial intent and preserving semantic ambiguity. There are passages where there is this ambiguity, and we would like to preserve it and not explicate and go one way or the other. And the other one is my favorite, respect for the reader's interpretive role. And yeah, the reader has this hermeneutical freedom, and we need to respect that and don't direct their understanding, even though sometimes we think, oh, we want to have the correct meaning. And in with regard to ambiguous text, we can always ask, what is the meaning? What is the correct meaning? Or what do we mean by a correct meaning? And then, of course, avoiding doctrinal bias. So, in my years of consultant checking, I have actually seen people with good intention do things that could bring in a doctrinal bias in their translation. And the other one is what we heard from Dr. Noali right before me in this room when he's talked about textual integrity and literary style, about parallelism, repetitions, imagery, and the figures of speech, and also historical and cultural authenticity. I remember when we were translating the Bible, the people did not know what a camel was. So they were like, what do we do about a camel? We don't know what a camel is. And okay, let's just change it to bull. But those are things that we do to make things clearer. Like I said, I'm including everything in this presentation as implicit and explicit. But then I asked them, like 10 years from now, you will have electricity and you will have television, and people will see what a camel is, and they'll think, oh, these translators, they were fools. They did not know what a camel was. They instead gave us this example that saying that, okay, that's an animal like a bull. So uh, that's one. And another one is the risk of doctrinal distortion. Like I said, there are so many translations where I have seen adding implicit information kind of distorts the doctrine and takes it to a different interpretation. And of course, as linguists, we are all worried about the pragmatic and communicative concerns like overloading the text, information overload. You get lost in this various implicit information provided in the text, outside the text, everywhere in the Bible. And then it also skews the focus of narration. And we have experienced how providing even absolutely essential implicit information can skew the focus of a text. And then there is this genre confusion. Are you going to translate the Bible, or are you writing a commentary? And then you also lose the genre. Well, like, when you try to explain things in a poetry, you lose it. It doesn't remain a poetry anymore. And poetry, especially that genre, is there so that we can read and enjoy it. Like every time, it's like you go into your treasure room and bring out new things, like Jesus said then that parable. So you need to go back to a poetry multiple times to receive what is in that genre. And now this is my thing. There is a need for restraint so that we avoid excessive explication. So we come to this principle of minimal necessary explicitation, which comes from a theory that most translations have more information than is what is there in the original source text. It is not just about Bible translation. In the translation studies world, they looked at everything and they found that this hypothesis says that there is always more information in the translated text. And it is all done with good intentions. Like I said, the consultant who wanted the translator to had a very heavy millstone, I don't blame him, because when he comes from a culture where probably he never encountered a millstone in his life. But sometimes good intention is not enough. And here we are talking about a restraint where we not only provide only that is minimally needed, but also we also consider the audience. what is minimally needed for this particular audience. I know preaching to a choir, but these are very important things that we remind ourselves with. So once, and the other thing is because we know if, from learning relevance theory that our concepts in our mind, they are linked to one another. So when I said Nasik at the beginning of my presentation, a lot of us here who are from India, it wasn't just a word. It brought back so many memories. Maybe it brought back all those parathas we had or the peanut butter sandwiches we had in the morning. So it brings in a lot of other things because our mind is like a spider's web and it connects to things. So when we provide unnecessary information or information that people already know, they start thinking about other things. This particular community, when they hear a heavy millstone, they could start overthinking if they are like me. I tend to overthink all the time. And why did they have this heavy in there? Is it bigger than the millstone that we have? Or are there very lightweight millstones in the world? Or why exactly did Jesus say this? It is heavy, that it is heavy. So those are things that naturally happen when we process information as human beings. So as I work with oral translations, this is one question I get always wherever I am. People come and ask me, okay, we have footnotes, we have side notes, we have all these things, extra textual things, paratextual information that we can provide in a print Bible. But what about you guys? How do you do that? You only have this translation orally, and how do you provide all this information that we can in the text world provide the readers with? So that is why I did this experiment, a project with one of the translation teams that I work with. Like wanted to say earlier in the beginning, this is not a theoretical paper. This is just presenting some of my findings from doing a project, trying to provide some implicit information or additional information in oral Bible translation. So this team is very excited. They are very committed. I am always humbled by this team because they begin their morning by prayer. Before recording any draft, they would pray and then go and record because they take this work very seriously. They know this is God's word, and their reverence to God's word and God Himself has challenged me so many times. So very excited. They're like, oh, we will gladly do this project if it would help other oral translation teams in the world. So this is the passage we chose. Very familiar passage. Jesus was walking and the disciples started plucking grain heads and eating. And then the Pharisees asked him about why these disciples are doing what they're not supposed to do. And Jesus replies with what happened with David and his friends. So here we decided to take this passage, and basically there are just two implicit information needed for comprehension in this passage. One is that they were not allowed to work on a Sabbath day, and the other one was David was not a priest. He went into the temple and ate it, but he was not a priest, and that's why it was wrong. So the group one we had four groups of people, and oral people, are very interactive. So they like to communicate in a group. Instead of asking individuals, we had a group of 5 people, and we had 4 sets of these people. So a total of 20 people. So this is what, oh, it's hidden. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's okay. We we went to the next one. Okay. Okay. So the first group were asked, okay, what did the disciples do that was wrong? And they said, oh, general, there was something. Leaving God's commands, they were going in another direction. This is a literal back translation. So there is something wrong that they did. They did not obey some of God's command and they did not follow it. And why was that wrong? Is because they said, "Oh, if God has given you a command, they have to follow that, right?" It didn't matter. They, but it did elicit a lot of discussion. You cannot disobey His order, but they did not get that point that the disciples were working on a Sabbath. And then the third question, what did David do? And they told the whole story about what David did. And then why was that wrong? So, you need to understand this is a group. So there are several opinions within this thing. So the first thing was that it is not wrong. If you're hungry, you have to eat. So whether it's disciples or whether it's David, you have to eat. So you do whatever to eat. So that was the first one. And the second one was, oh, it's like a theft. So David stole the bread. So which is wrong. So definitely that is wrong. So that was their inference. And then we provided the next group with an additional information in a very narrative form about how God prohibiting people to work on Sabbath, and then the information that David and his companion, they were not priests, but they still ate the bread that was meant for the priests. So here again, what we did was we provided the information at the beginning of the passage. They listened to it, and then they listened to the translation. So here it was very interesting. They decided that they ate bread. They didn't care who ate bread. The disciples ate bread, and somebody corrected, say, no, 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 they ate grain heads from the wheat field. And the second question, why was this wrong? Which command they disobeyed was not very clear to them. They said whatever God had told them not to do on Sabbath, they did. So that was it. And then what did David do was the correct answer. And the fourth was very interesting because they thought they ate on a Sabbath. That is thing. And then they said, they were not Catholics. And non-Catholics should not be eating mass, right? Participating in mass. So that is exactly what they did. And then they broke the rules and entered the holy place. That's the other thing they found out. And so basically, they forgot what they had heard in the beginning, and they could not connect it with the passage. So the third group, interestingly, had the passage first. So they listened to the translation first, and then they listened to the additional information. And surprise, surprise, they were very well able to connect the information provided with the translation. And I was very glad to hear that because the next one is different. So they had all the answers correct. They said, which was a wrong act, which is like, working on Sabbath is wrong. Uh, they should not have worked on Sabbath because even plucking grain is a work. And David was hungry. He went and ate. And then the fourth question, why was it wrong? Because David and his friends were not priests. So they were able to connect very well with the information provided. And the fourth group, this is my least favorite way of providing implicit information, but we added the implicit information in the translation itself. Something like a little explicit translation here. And surprise, this group also did extremely well. Not a surprise, but they did extremely well and they got all the answers correct. So we found out that providing information in the beginning did not work. Not providing any information can take them to any interpretation they want. But it did elicit a lot more discussion than the other three groups, which is interesting. And then providing information after was very effective because their answers were precise and they were able to connect the information to the passage. And then this is the findings. So I am not here to tell you you have to do one of these, but this is just a presentation of this little project that we did with this oral Bible translation team. And so, with regard to providing information, one of the things we did with the Spoken English Bible, before it was called Spoken English Bible, and we were trying to see how we can develop oral exegetical tools. Some of us made some oral exegetical tools as narrative stories for the book of Jonah and book of Ruth, and we tested it among the Senga people in Zambia who are represented here. Yes. And then very surprisingly, we found that they not only used this key concept stories or these stories about difficult ideas or unknown ideas, but they were using it in their everyday life. They loved listening to these stories because they provided them with information. So, Spoken English website has a lot of those key concept stories, and adding them or providing that along with the translation, because right now it is intended to be a resource, but we can think ahead and probably start translating those to be provided as additional information instead of adding everything into the text and skewing the focus, because listening, it takes a lot more time. It takes a lot more concentration to listen and understand. Like if you get distracted, you can go back to the previous line and read, but not in audio. It's gone, unless you listen to that again. So this is what we found to be very helpful, minimal information that's needed, and with respect to the audience and their cognitive abilities. So, thank
Yes, thank you so much, Swapna, for this very interesting consideration. Who has a question? Please come forward. Yes.
Thank you. Great presentation. When you were providing the additional information, what form did that look like?
Oh, good question. I did not make that clear. Yes, it was like a story in a narrative style, and it was an audio product. So they listened to the translation and the additional information. It was crafted orally. Yes, come in.
Actually, you were speaking our heart. We're so excited to see your presentation because these are the challenges that we face every day. So I have two questions. One is about ambiguities. Where do we balance it? Because we have a group of people who have no resources. They have no access to any resources. And their culture is, we say black or white. You say it. Is it this or this? So otherwise, they feel like you didn't explain it. So we have that problem in consulting. When we explain both sides, then they will ask, okay, so now which one we have to pick? Or no, both have that information. Then they will ask, Praveen, what do you believe? Now I am stuck. So in that situation, what will be your suggestion? That's what will be ethical for us to do. And the second one, it's from Durai actually. So we talked about millstone, right? Where we grind. So the technology keep changing. So you put that there, and maybe after 10 years, this have been gone, and there is a new machine for doing that. So how we do the upgradation for those translations?
Two great questions, Praveen. So let me start with the millstone because I might have to think about what your first question was. So, yes, that is true. Technologies change, so nobody uses millstones anymore, and they use flour mills or just go to the grocery store and get ground flour. That is what people would use, and that is very true. But that's what I said we have to keep the audience in mind. We are translating for the present generation, the current audience that we have now. So I think ethically we do justice to them. But we also keep in mind the future generations coming. And probably at that point, like you said, we have to upgrade our translation and probably provide a picture of a millstone and say that this is how people used to grind flour grains 10 years ago. So I really don't have a good answer for that, but I think that our moral responsibility is to cater to this current generation. There is sometimes this also extends to things like, okay, we want to use an archaic, pure minority language. Language has changed. That nobody speaks that language except 80-year-olds. So we use the current language which is used in the community. So it's the same way, like, we translate for this present generation. And the other one, ambiguity, that's thing not only with the sign language translation or oral translation, or, it's there everywhere. When there are two different interpretations possible, people would ask. But I still think that it is good to leave the ambiguity in the text, in the translation, so that people have something to grapple with. And like we are all created, like Brian Harmeling said, we are all created in God's image with the same faculties. So we need to leave some of those ambiguity there so that we are faithful to the text. But we can always provide some other extra textual materials to clarify certain things, unless it is extremely misleading and extremely dangerous. Okay, next question.
Thank you, Swapna. Baruch Klasnika, Jerusalem Seminary. I want to ask, suggest maybe, I don't know, the minimal information needed might include at least the basic orientation towards Sabbath laws, because a lot of the responses seem to struggle with that and breaking and I, over the past 20 years of training Bible translators in Israel, I've come to realize how I and we have often misunderstood the Sabbath. For example, you might be surprised that God never commands anybody not to do work on the Sabbath.
Rest.
It's melacha and not the avodah. So it's a more technical term. That basic fact in the Hebrew Bible that it doesn't use the generic term for doing work helps us tremendously in understanding how Jesus didn't break the Sabbath. And that minimal amount of information would release, us from so many different misunderstandings, I believe. And so I would encourage, I guess all of us to have that minimal information needed to understand all of the Sabbath controversies in the New Testament.
Thank you so much, Baruch. Very helpful. Yes, I agree with you.